Happy New Year, everybody. While it might be a new year, it's the same old playbook for Sony's spin-off Spider-Man universe, also known as the SSSU. The new smash hit, Kraven the Hunter, is the sixth and seemingly final film in the franchise, at least for now. To be clear, it was originally stated that this spin-off universe was dead, but it seems what they actually meant is that they're taking a break from the specific approach that they currently have at a universe. I personally think it confirms that even when they come back to make more spin-off movies, it's not like we'll be seeing Jared Leto back as Morbius. So although we can technically call this a break, this is the end for some of these characters. This also all but confirms that some previously announced projects such as El Muerto and the Sinister Six are almost definitely not happening. Obviously that door is never truly closed, but since the universe has gone so terribly, I don't really see them coming back and releasing a movie about a professional wrestler turned anti-hero who gains superpowers because of his mask. Sinister Six is more of a possibility, but that wouldn't be a Sinister Six composed of Morbius, Kraven, and Tom Hardy's Venom. It's like I said, they will continue spin-offs in the future, just not with these actors and not with some of these characters. Anyways, today we are here to discuss the downfall of the SSSU, talk about why killing the franchise is a necessary choice, and what it could mean if the series is resurrected in the future. And to properly cover this topic, we need to start at the beginning. We need to start with the backstory. The Sony spin-off universe started in 2018 with Venom, but before we can just jump into the SSSU, a very key piece to this history is the film rights of Spider-Man and supporting characters. Sony and Marvel have passed around film rights to different characters for many years. After the two Amazing Spider-Man films, there was a deal negotiated between Sony and Marvel for Marvel to be able to use Spider-Man in the MCU, which allowed Tom Holland to be cast in the role for Captain America Civil War in 2015. From a legal standpoint, Sony still has the rights to use the character of Spider-Man in their own movies. We haven't seen this in live action, but Peter Parker was in two Spider-Verse films which were released by Sony and not specifically associated with the MCU. Technically, Miguel O'Hara does reference the events of Spider-Man No Way Home, but that makes sense considering Miguel is aware of everything happening across the Spider-Verse, no pun intended. What's more important is that from a legal standpoint, Sony could release The Amazing Spider-Man 3 with Andrew Garfield if they really wanted to. Probably not happening, but it's not like it's out of the question. The Sony and Marvel agreement mainly allowed Marvel to take control of Spider-Man's use in film. If the word control sounds like a reach, it's really not. Sony would be absolutely stupid if they announced a new Spider-Man project with a new Spider-Man actor that would be in competition with Tom Holland. This will never happen while the MCU is using Spider-Man. It would be one of the dumbest decisions that Sony could make. So instead, Sony has found their own lane and has been creating projects that aren't hugely in competition with the MCU. The Spider-Verse films are beloved movies that are unique to Sony. And of course, there's the spin-off universe that primarily focused on Spider-Man villains. Marvel and Sony's agreement was renegotiated in 2019, which allowed for overlap between the MCU Spider-Man and Sony's spin-off universe. In 2021, Venom Let There Be Carnage's post-credit scene saw Venom transported into the MCU, watching the news where they are discussing the reveal of Spider-Man's real identity. Not too long after that, we got Spider-Man No Way Home, where we saw the return of many villains as well as previous Spider-Man. And then in the No Way Home post-credit scene, they basically get rid of Venom right away, which undoes any potential with that connection that was set up in Let There Be Carnage. Oh, and while we're here, shameless plug to check out my No Way Home video if you're interested. The next example of crossover happens in 2022 when Morbius had one of the most iconic post-credit scenes of all time. For some reason that I'm sure they could logically explain, Vulture is transported into the Sony universe and wants to team up with Dr. Michael Morbius himself. And then finally in 2023, we get Across the Spider-Verse, we see cameo appearances of Andrew and Tobey, as well as the aforementioned reference to the events of Spider-Man No Way Home. As a whole, not much has really come of these crossover events. Most of them are singular instances to elevate a particular project. I just wanted to highlight the slight overlap that this new deal has allowed. I'm sure we'll see more in the future, although it will be interesting to see how different it is considering what's happening with this universe. The gist of all of this is, since the failure of the Amazing Spider-Man movies, Sony pawned off Spider-Man and went in a new direction with the spin-off projects they decided to produce. When Venom was released in 2018, it was met with mixed reception. It received a pretty low Rotten Tomatoes score, but an incredibly high audience score, which is still at an 80% to this day. It grossed over $850 million at the worldwide box office, and generally was accepted as a non-offensive, alright time at the theater. At the time, people were fine with this movie, and many were just happy to see a new version of Venom on the big screen. After a 3-year break with no releases, they followed up with Venom Let There Be Carnage, directed by Andy Serkis and starring Woody Harrelson as Carnage himself. And it's pretty much universally agreed that it's worse than the first film. But at this point, people still weren't super against these movies, and Let There Be Carnage still grossed quite a bit of cash. However, after that point, the Sony spin-off universe has included Morbius, Madam Web, Venom: The Last Dance, and Kraven the Hunter. We also had an announcement for an El Muerto movie that was set to release in January 2024. To put it bluntly, this universe has been on a steady decline for the last few years, and with the release of Kraven the Hunter, the SSSU is dead. Sony is shifting focus to its animated projects, the live-action Spider-Man Noir show currently being worked on at Prime Video, and of course, they're working on where Tom Holland's Spider-Man will be implemented in the MCU moving forward. But most of those things I just mentioned have been happening while Sony has been releasing these spin-offs, so we have to wonder, why are they taking a break? We all knew that things have been really bad for Sony, but I'll be honest, I didn't realize just how bad it was. Let's start by looking at some box office numbers. Box office success and quality are not always tied together, but sometimes they are. And in general, films that are getting review bombed and not viewed positively by the public are set up for failure financially. I set up a whole document with a bunch of random box office data to compare the Sony films to other superhero franchises. I ended up making a lot of charts, most of them aren't super important, but here are the most interesting things that I found. This chart just shows the worldwide gross for the Sony films. As you can see, Venom absolutely carried, and outside of the Venom movies, we are looking at some very low numbers. Sony has 6 films in their spin-off universe, so here is their total box office earnings compared to the first 6 MCU films, the last 6 MCU films, and then the same with the DC Extended Universe, the first 6 and last 6. Honestly, the most shocking thing with this was the DCEU has such a discrepancy. Their first 6 films ended up being the peak, while their last 6 were the lowest, even lower than the Sony franchise. Here's the breakdown of the last 6 DCEU films if you're curious. Finally, this chart is just the 3 lowest films from Sony, Marvel, and the DC Extended Universe. It's actually crazy that Marvel doesn't flop very often, but just in general, this does show that there's a correlation between box office results and franchises getting cut off. Outside of box office numbers, another reason why they're taking a break is because of public reception to these films. Similar to the box office numbers, I compiled scores from Rotten Tomatoes, Letterboxd, and IMDb. In order for a movie to be considered fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, it needs a score of 60% or higher. Of the 6 Sony films, their average score lands at a 28.5%. And to be very clear, this score is highly inflated by the Venom movies. If I take the Venom films out and only look at Morbius, Madam Web, and Kraven the Hunter, the average Rotten Tomatoes score is a 14%. Shockingly, the average audience score on Rotten Tomatoes for these films is a lot higher, with a 74%. The only film that's below a 60 is Madam Web at 55%. Looking at Letterboxd, they score films out of 5, and the SSSU average is a 2.17 out of 5. And then finally, looking at IMDb, they have another surprising average of 5.5 out of 10. To be honest, some of these scores, especially from the audience, are pretty good. They definitely don't reflect how people discuss these films online. I do think that there's another way that we could view this. There's plenty of people who just don't care to watch these movies. I haven't even seen Kraven the Hunter at this point, and to be honest, I don't really plan to. It's not like these films are being viewed by millions and millions of people and then maintaining decent averages. If I went to see Kraven, I would probably be another negative review. A negative review that isn't currently in the tally, and I think there's definitely more people like me. I only bring this up to highlight that these scores would likely be lower if the films were more popular, and their lack of popularity and failing box office numbers are more significant than the scores that they get from the few people who do decide to watch the films. Shockingly, despite all of this data, and despite, I think, everybody knowing that this universe is failing, Sony Pictures CEO Tony Vinciquerra chimed in to give some of his thoughts on this universe ending. The craziest thing was him claiming that both Madam Web and Kraven the Hunter were good movies, and that he was surprised that Kraven bombed so hard. I honestly can't tell if these are legitimate comments or if this is just a CEO trying to keep a positive outlook on their dying films. Regardless, neither of those options would be beneficial. They need to understand and accept that the route they've been following is not going to work moving forward, and denial will do nothing but delay progress. There's one final huge reason why they're taking this break. They're cutting off these films to focus on the other projects they have coming down the pipeline. But that discussion deserves its own section. So it's time to wonder, what's next for Sony? As I've been scripting this video, we keep getting more updates in regards to Sony and what happened with the spin-off universe. The biggest one is that Sony is taking their recent flops very seriously, which is a great starting place. Money talks, and for Sony's recent projects, the money was clear. These films are not what people want, and a course correction is necessary. So, what's next for Sony? There's plenty of upcoming projects that we know about coming in the next few years. Reportedly, they are spending a lot of time and putting a ton of care into Beyond the Spider-Verse, which makes sense because they absolutely have to land the end of this trilogy. We also have Spider-Man 4 that's coming in between Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars, and if I'm being honest, I could spend an entire dedicated video talking about why I'm worried about this film. Maybe I will, who knows. There's also the Spider-Man Noir live-action series from Prime Video starring Nick Cage. I'm excited about this, and I think it could be a really unique project. All of these have been known for a while, so let's discuss some other possibilities with Sony moving forward. One of my biggest predictions is that we will see Tom Hardy back as Venom. I'm not sure if that will be in the MCU or a future Sony project involving Spider-Man, but I think most people like Hardy as Venom, and it would be a shame if we didn't see Venom face off with Spider-Man. Realistically, I don't see how we could be introduced to a brand new Venom anytime soon, so unless this iconic showdown isn't happening for many years, I see it involving Tom Hardy's Venom. I also think Sony will continue to lean into their animated universe. After Beyond the Spider-Verse, I think more projects will be released within this same universe. It's been incredibly successful for them, and they clearly have a ton of talent that has been poured into these movies. It would be really unfortunate if we just got the Spider-Verse trilogy and then they didn't release any other projects within this world. When it comes to the future for a Spider-Man spin-off universe, I don't think that Sony will wait all that long to reboot. The biggest takeaway from this announcement is that the current projects are not working and they need to course correct. But it's not like it would take much to cut off this flow of movies. After all, they already ended this franchise right before Kraven the Hunter came out. At that time, they didn't even know that Kraven would have the lowest opening of any of these spin-off films. Obviously, They knew that things have been bad, and Kraven was just the final blow to kill this franchise. But if they actually are taking it seriously, I don't think they have to wait too long before they can start releasing movies again. While it has been fun to watch these movies, not take them seriously, and enjoy the many memes provided by the internet, most of us are glad that this universe is over. And while it has been an incredibly rough set of films, I am hopeful that they can take a step back, refocus, and make films that people will actually enjoy. This break is good, and I'd even call it necessary. What's next for Sony? We don't fully know, but I hold out hope that it's better than what the SSSU had to offer. Superhero franchises come and go. Between studio changes, character rights being passed around, and sometimes movies just consistently underperforming, who knows which superhero franchise will go next. While the SSSU ended in 2024, the new DC universe has begun. In July, we're getting James Gunn's Superman movie. Technically, his new universe has already started with Creature Commandos, but I think most of us are withholding judgment until we see the Man of Steel back on the big screen. The reason I'm mentioning this is twofold. One, I plan to cover Superman and the DC universe in an upcoming video, so this topic just excites me to bring up. And the second reason is to highlight the fact that even though the old DC extended universe was a messy bunch of films that consistently underperformed at the box office, I'm back on the hype train for DC with their new universe led by James Gunn. Sony might have failed at crafting their current universe, but in the future, with better direction, a clear vision, and more effort, I believe Sony can bring the hype again. And if they do, I will be there to join in the excitement for whatever they have planned. They might be down, but they are not out, and I would love to see a successful comeback in the future. Make sure to leave a comment letting me know what you think of Sony's universe ending, and also what you would like to see them change in the future. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and I'll see you all again very soon.